This is Privateer Station, and today we bring you day 705 of Russian war with Ukraine. As always, with former advisor to the Office of the President of Ukraine, Lieutenant Colonel Alexei Arestovych, and Nikolay Feldman. Our special thanks, of course, go to our members. Today we nod to ex-Gaidamag and Out There. Thank you guys for sticking with us, and thank you for helping us to create this content. With this, let's deep dive into day 705. It was a rather long conversation for an hour and a half, so we're splitting that in two parts. One will come out today, another tomorrow. Thanks again. Take a listen. Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolay Feldman. You are watching War Diary with Alexei Arestovych, and he just joined our stream. Hi there. Okay, last one we ended on the note of Ukraine growing up. You promised us to give it a thought, and I have a question. Did anything change regarding our appeals and your, especially your appeals to the people? Well, judging by the whole circus that is happening in Telegram channels about leaving or not Zaluzhnyi and resigning him from his position, I don't think we grew up a bit from last Monday. I think it was just a media action. They dumped a lot of information to see how people will react to that, and now they're playing it back. No, Nikolai, I don't think anybody is actually playing back. Do not relax yet. Give it a bit of time. You may need to strain again. Some people may need to relax, others not. Life is a more complex thing than just black and white. Right. There are some channels now saying that it is not true, others are saying it is true, and the third ones are saying that it's in process. You know, it's Ukraine. Things are still evolving, and Telegram channels will likely be sharing more news on that. Okay, let's go over some sources of this news. First one was Borislav Bereza, then Yuriy Butuzov and Ilya Cymbaluk picked it up. So Bereza published this at 6:23 p.m. At 6:45, Telegram channel Trocha with their sources, and we understand that their sources are usually in the office of the president. As far as I know, they said that Zaluzhnyi indeed was removed. And then press secretary Nikiforov denounced that news, and before that, some speakers from the advisory of national security and the other orgs, they said that Zaluzhnyi was indeed called onto the carpet to communicate with Zelensky, and there probably was a formulation to send him as an ambassador somewhere, and he refused, according to the sources, and went to pack his bags. But then, an hour later, the media came out and said that this was not true, it didn't happen. See how big politics are done in Ukraine. I think all the truth will be found on the Telegram channel of Nikolaevsky Vanyok. Yeah, right, I did not check this one. True, Vanyok. What indeed does he say? All right, well, we'll continue monitoring this. We have a picture. They're saying that there is a new offer to Commander General. I'm not sure if you can confirm that or not. Yeah, right, I was offered and I'm reviewing that. Not sure to agree or not. Okay, enough with jokes. Let's... And for those who are listening, there's a picture of Alexei in his youth and younger ranks in military. Okay, so going back to all the discussions about Zaluzhnyi, you did express a warning back in the day, and you said this is not time yet to fire Commander General. In your opinion, did anything change since that threat where they were talking about removing Zaluzhnyi? Did anything change between then and now? Is it time now? All right. What would it mean if indeed we replace Commander General? What does it mean usually for the country, regardless of names? How it would be read in Russia, in the West, and other neutral countries, and aliens, and by all the outside observers. It will be read universally outside of Ukrainian context, because internally we'll be talking about Zaluzhnyi removal, whose rating is twice higher than Zelensky, and there are inner political workings that start another Maidan in this regard. But for the outside observer, it would mean that Supreme Commander of Ukraine recognized ineffective ways they are fighting this war and is replacing Commander General with a new one. That's the only reason to really replace Commander General. And now I have a question to the viewers. Do you think the previous strategy was not effective or effective? And since what date is it effective? Please vote, right, guys, in the chat. Because if you remove yourself from the persons, because for me, Zaluzhnyi, I'm his friend. He's a good friend of mine for 25 years. So without naming people here, is our method of fighting war effective? And one can ask who is providing the strategy of this war, unlike Supreme Commander. I can even prognosticate Podolak's statement about the situation and what he will say. He will say that he is picking, basically, Supreme Commander is picking a new commander, general, with whom it will be easier to continue this war. And I have a request to our listeners, try to denounce that formulation. Well, about the inner fights between Zaluzhnyi and Zelensky, I think it's only the lazy one who hasn't commented on that. And it's obvious that probably it will be more comfortable for Zelensky to work with somebody else. Well, Nikolay, Ukrainians are like big children in mass, right? The mass cognition is probably on the level of 7 or 8-year-old. Do not be specifically upset, dear compatriots, it's everywhere like this, but we're talking about Ukraine now, right? In some places, maybe 10, but in general, average would probably be 7 or 8. So this is very cartoon conscience, where you need a happy end, big beautiful letters, big beautiful pictures. Unfortunately, life is a little more complex. And adult is the one who can recognize these complexities in life around you. That's why I'm suggesting for you guys to think without the last names of Zelensky, Zaluzhnyi, and persons. What would it mean if we do replace Commander-in-Chief? That basically would be read as Ukraine acknowledging their war strategy to be ineffective. I'm considering our war strategy to be ineffective since basically middle of 22. Not because Zaluzhnyi is bad, but because ever since the liberation of Kherson, we have not been effective. Because together with the West, we allowed Russians to dig in after Kherson liberation. And we also trumpeted our counteroffensive as much as we could, me including. I was talking about it. So we did a few mistakes there. Now the question, the central one, of replacement Zaluzhnyi. I would put it like this. Would the new strategy of war be effective? Or everything will start and end with the replacement of Commander-in-Chief? Because if we're talking about strategy, there should be other replacements besides that figure. And the main thing, the strategy itself needs to be updated, right? Under which new people would be creating their plan. But if it will just be only about the person and his replacement, then it would be seen rather much as the political assassination. So if there would be a new name and he would start radical changes in the army, our military-industrial complex will restart in a better fashion. Our commander-in-chief will be sending different messages, will be addressing other pressing issues that are not addressed right now. And then we can say that this is not a political assassination. Indeed, we're working with effectivity of these issues. Then again, where will Zaluzhnyi be moved to, right? Some Telegram channels said that he'll be moved to the position of the head of National Security Office, secretary of the committee, because president is the head of this committee and he could be a secretary. So that organ generally answers to the president, same as commander-in-chief, and it coordinates the politics and strategies of defense for the whole country. And in some consideration, one can even call it to be a promotion. And formally, it would be difficult to attack it as the assassination, right? So he will still be in the flow. He'll be affecting a lot of processes on the strategic level, including the ones related directly to war. So this is not that. Because otherwise, this will actually be reviewed by all the political commentators from two angles, either political assassination or change of strategy. Us, as Ukrainians, what are we interested in? Of course, in change of strategy, right? So that's what what our interest is. That's what we should be wishing for, right? Okay, that was a very detailed answer, but there is one more question that comes out of what you said. For example, Kirill Budanov, General Budanov, do you think he can become the commander-in-chief who can realize new strategy, whichever it is? Because the question here is, you, as a person who actually aided in Zaluzhnyi taking this position, so you have some logic indicating that not every general would be effective in this position. Right. I thought that he is the most effective and still think he is most effective, so I did everything to make sure that he was appointed. All right, to talk about Budanov, Mariana Bezugla recently actually gave a good valuation for several generals. And in her Budanov's characteristic, I think she caught it real well. She says that he is a skilled general who is capable of taking extraordinary decisions. And he proved that with all his service career and with the position as the head of defense intelligence of Ukraine. He showed that he can take extraordinary decisions. He is very bright in this regard, but he has a drawback. He grew up within the intelligence system. And despite his acknowledgement of and communication with military, with the infantry, and with the army, he did not grow up in that system. And I think it's a mistake that we have that department separated from the army. Army should have its own military intelligence, not asking for it. Army should be ordering what it needs to know. Well, Ministry of Intelligence, Defense Intelligence, is reporting to Ministry of Defense, so it's a different structure. And basically, it indicates that Kirill grew in a non-military system. So for him to take command of 900,000 army, where everybody from lieutenant to general, this is one system of connections and logic, and defense intelligence is different. And I cannot say that the relations between these two structures are really good. So he will have to change and accommodate and adjust to many things and deal with what otherwise is known as general mafia, right? Generals mafia. And somebody mentioned to me that there were only 5 generals throughout the history of military who managed to go against that so-called mafia and the flow and the top brass and realize serious reforms. So first one that needs addressing would be training. If and regardless who will be appointed, if you'll figure a way to deal with the catastrophic training and refitting of new recruits for proper positions. Second, will he be able to alleviate the formalism and paperwork for lower level commanders especially? Third, are we going to abandon the old Soviet style orders and Russian style commanding? Basically go there, task 200, where you'll be killed and dead. And also if he will have enough influence to make sure that the opinion of the younger commanders in the forces will be acknowledged. And I'll tell you what they think, because commanders know that if in his battalion he's got 30, 40, or 50% of refusers who don't want to fight in the trench, then it makes much more difficult for this brigade to carry out the tasks set by the generals. Even technically, it's sometimes impossible just in defense, not even talking about offensive. So we know situations where in some parts of our 1,200-mile-long front, there are 9 people holding a kilometer because the rest are wounded, refusing, or whatever's happened with them. So these 9 people have to be super highly motivated to continue holding that kilometer under relentless attacks of drones, artillery, and enemy. And I would say probably not a kilometer, but 500 yards. But yeah, there are places like that. And the quality of our recruits still desires to be much better. And we understand that the training takes a lot, and you cannot take new recruits to replace those 9 people who will be holding the same line, the same part of the front just as effectively. And it will be younger commanders who will be dealing with these issues. They'll be the ones responsible for that, up to battalion commander. And now, did anybody ask them how to conduct mobilization so that they can conduct their tasks successfully? And the answer is no. So my question here is, will new commander-in-chief ask them this question? And I can tell you that they probably suggest allow us to recruit directly to our brigades, just like the 3rd and the 5th and some others are doing already, right? So they can hire people whom they pre-select. And suddenly you may discover that there are people who are willing to come to these brigades, who want to join them from other brigades or from civilian service, because they have friends and family serving there. And just the fact of having a good friend or relative serving with you, that already makes people motivated much better. Because in the face of your comrades, it would be harder often for people to refuse and to crumble. So why don't we have direct recruiting into these brigades? We can talk about different things, but let's send a very straight message here. Telegram channels. Cut Arestovych not only from some picture in Saks Fifth Avenue in New York, but cut that stream from that little snippet from this stream when there'll be direct recruiting to the brigades. That would really affect what we are doing on the front. Can you? I know it will not be paid for you by the political opponents, but maybe you can do it for our motherland. Right, Alexei, we have been talking about direct recruiting into these brigades, and just as you mentioned, the 3rd Storm Brigade, I think we talked about them at least 10 times on different occasions, because this is definitely an experience that deserves to be scaled up. The problem is that, I think, even if you are going to that 3rd Brigade or some other place and you take that document paperwork to a recruiting office, it doesn't mean that you will get into this brigade, because you're coming to your regional center and you go through the same system with the same people who have a different plan to recruit to other positions in the front. So, and that's what reality is, what we are addressing regularly. All right, so I think we unwrapped this topic with Zaluzhnyi and Supreme Commander, and let's await for other messages to see how it unfolds. But in regards to growing up, last stream we also dedicated some time to the position of Sergei Leshchenko, who during Davos did say that we should be seizing additional aid to refugees, and you said that let's give him a chance. Maybe he's not so extreme, maybe he just made a mistake and he will correct himself. Let's wait till he makes this mistake again. But now President Zelensky took this responsibility upon him, and we learned today that indeed President himself is holding the position that all that aid for refugees, that aid should be taken directly to Ukraine budget, not given to refugees who are in Europe. That's what he said in his interview to the channel ART in Germany. So President took responsibility for that statement. Do you think this is a grown-up position to demand from European countries that they refuse aiding the refugees and would run and give this money to Ukrainian budget instead? I think it is a grown-up position on the president's side that he took this mobilization discussion upon himself, and he now has this trend of taking some negative decisions upon himself and discussing them on his level, so that can be welcomed. But as for this decision, I don't think Europeans will go for this, because it goes against their social political model. And I want to remind here, not officially, but a while there was a suggestion, let's pick all the Ukrainian males in Europe who are hiding there from mobilization, pick them up and send them back in Ukraine so they can fight. In Estonia, that was discussed rather seriously, but even they refused and figured they cannot do it, because according to European laws, not a single court can send a person to the area where there is a serious risk to his life. So Now a question, why are we bringing up this matter on the presidential level, knowing in advance that it is going to fail? I think the discussion is around the finance. And we still do not have neither American nor European aid yet, despite our dire need for that. And I think this is a dance around the financial aid to Ukraine at large. So there are different options being suggested that try to awaken and revive Western discussion, and they will be reacting to president's statements. Right, regardless of the quality of that statement, Western politicians will have to react to that. That will become a subject of parliamentary debate and notes and process. So this will be discussed on all levels, and this is basically the matter of giving economic aid to Ukraine. How effective it will be, I don't know. As a person who tried all kinds of argumentation with the West, you never know which one will be most effective. For me, because I'm often being invited to different interviews and discussions, daily I have them, and I'm seeing what correspondents are remembering when they ask questions. They're saying that a year ago you said 1, 2, and 3, and we generally very agree with that. So when I was saying things a year and a half ago, first of all, I wasn't sure that that message will reach them and that will reach them a year and a half later. But I'm glad it did, right? Remember during his press conference when Zelensky said, I do not know where we find money for all that, because it takes up to $1 million hryvnias to prepare one person, and we're about to recruit 500,000, and we don't have funds to do that. So Ukraine is now going through some examination on a historic scale that we either pass or fail if we manage to mobilize that many. If we fail, that's one story. Another thing if we pass it. And that will be a whole other level of history. That's not even a question to Zelensky. It's more a larger frame question. Will there be Ukraine or not? And this question is tightly connected with money. And I would not be surprised if there'll be more strange argumentation or stronger argumentation that would be asking for these funds. And we do not see this communication at large in the United States and in Europe right now, even though it is very pressing in Ukraine to have these resources. And Yermak and Kuleba were meeting with their counterparts in Zakarpattia, in Hungary, and the Hungarian side was talking about, we probably will not give you weapons, but we'll give you some monetary support, and probably they'll deblock European aid, so we probably will have a little more stability in this. This is factor number one right now, because Zelensky is listening to reports not only of the military, but also of the Minister of Finance and the government at large. And he understands that our situation, to say the least, is difficult. And he said more today that European aid will not be enough for Ukraine if Americans will abstain from helping. And this is a thesis not only about finance, and this is actually a more important thesis than give us the refugee money. And many people were laughing at this before, but for me, it is a question of argumentation. It's a question of bringing back the discussion of getting economic aid in the fastest fashion possible. And once again, some people may laugh at the formulation, but you never know what will work for the West. You know how many screams we had here and how many stones we endured from our audience when we talked about the possible unification of Russian and Ukrainian army, and if Putin conquers Ukraine, then he takes both forces and goes against NATO. Do you know that this is one of the most convincing arguments in the West? This is a heavy one. So let's talk about the aid from United States. When we have it, there is one scenario possible. When we don't, that's a whole other story. So Trump recently said that he called upon the Republicans to not give this aid. So how true does it ring, you think, and how much will you think it affect the consensus and the compromise between Republicans and Democrats about the border, and if they finish some agreement about the southern border and Trump is still against aiding Ukraine, what will be the outcome? Well, what will be the situation between different states that continue sending ultimatums to the Fed, and that whole discussion between the federal border guards and National Guard. The situation is rather heated there, but that basically puts the question of financial aid further and further away. And states themselves, they're following the path of escalation right now. And this is a serious story, because European aid may not be enough without American. So you think we'll be 50 billion short, right? Well, first of all, they give it, European aid comes for 4 years, right? And even if they give them all together, this is not enough even for the social aspect. Not even talking about military. Plus, the guns do not shoot with euros or dollars. We need ammo to load the guns with. And what is characteristic is that in Europe, over the last few days, there is a number of statements talking about urgent need to revive military-industrial complex, to start production of artillery shells, to make sure we donate enough of these resources to Ukraine. Otherwise, we'll have to be fighting ourselves within a 3 to 5 year frame. But my verdict here is we're late. Both Europe and the United States are running seriously late already. It doesn't mean that nothing should be done, because if nothing would be done, we'll definitely be late. But we are running late already. And if in that formula of running late, we minus the aid from America, financial aid, then we'll be really running late, both Europe and Ukraine. And future scenarios are being drawn in European newspapers. And I once again would remark, not evil Arestovych and Feldman or Romanenko talking about some Korean version. There are NATO representatives now talking about some sort of Korean version of resolution for this conflict. They are talking about other threats, possible nuclear strikes on European infrastructure, invasion through Poland, and other crises becoming the subject of military training, military exercises. And they understand that they are late on this agenda. And smart people are trying to reach their own leadership to make sure they are doing the right steps in the extraordinary frame, and not like they're usually doing it, yawning, saying that, well, maybe bring this question 4 months from now in Parliament, let them discuss it for 3 months, if we should increase our military production next year. That they are pressed for time. And if we remember Trump's statement that when he becomes a president, he might withdraw the United States from NATO, then NATO basically will not exist outside of America as a military bloc. They frankly are not a military bloc. Do you know why they exist? Let me open a mystery here while nobody listens, while we're just a couple of us. The military task for NATO was not to be a military counterpart for the Warsaw Pact. Warsaw Pact was formed much later than NATO, several years later. The main task for NATO was to make sure that Europeans would not be fighting against each other. This was the main task of Americans, and it was coordinated with the Marshall Plan and the Plan of Revival of Europe to make sure there are no internal wars. So NATO internally did not do anything as the joint bloc, didn't do much during the 70 years of their existence. And if they did, please show me. Everything they did was usually done by the hands of Americans, Brits. Oh yeah, they did the operation against Yugoslavia, but right, that was the only some parts, not all parts of the NATO were, not all NATO countries were participating. Even Afghanistan and Iraq, not all NATO countries were participating. And there were parallel operations by Brits, by United Kingdom, by United States, and then there was NATO structure somewhere performing stabilizing and guarding functions. So if Trump will remove United States from NATO, or just slow it down there, block it a little, then Europeans will be facing a very uncomfortable perspective that will tell them that they're weaker than Russia. And do you think they'll run to arm themselves to fight? Possibly. Or to give a lot to Ukraine as another option, or to give up to Russia, to surrender to Russia on the Hungarian variant by establishing special relations with Russia. And my bet is currently on the third, but to avoid it, we definitely are interested in making sure that they give us as much as they can right now. That's why I'm not judging harshly on his recent statements about the money, because he understands the price of this question. Not all of us understand it yet here in Ukraine, and the probability that European countries will pick the option to find ways to negotiate with Russia instead of escalating the conflict, and to do that individually, country by country, I give that option 95% probability. Well, they're also talking about the moods in the countries, right? The polling question in Europe is, polling center in Europe is regularly testing the readiness of their citizens to fight if the war spills over. The numbers grew a little, but facts remain that in Britain, only 20% of men from 18 to 40 will go as volunteers. 27% will go mobilize if they will be requested in case Britain is invaded. That's actually good numbers, but the thing is, Russia will not be invading and attacking their territories directly. They don't necessarily need it. They can establish bilateral relations with each country from the position of force. Yeah, Baltic countries may not be lucky, but here Russia has historic grievances that they might want to address, and they want to deblocade the ring that, as they see it, with the Baltic countries, because they are being shut off from the Baltic Sea. And Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania basically annulled the results of Russian 300-year-long politics. So they have a definite grievance about that. And Baltic countries, including Poland as well, are somewhat under threat. Russians will not be invading. Austria, Italy, and France definitely won't. And those countries know that as well. So for them, it will be much easier to come to some agreement, especially if United States will walk away or will fall into some scenario of a civil conflict when they will have no time to deal with Europe, or if they'll be bogged down in a conflict with Iran or some other places. So situation may be very difficult for Europe then, and Europe will be paying with a lot of money, and for that problem that we're paying for now with blood. It's just Europe will probably try to pay with money versus their own lives. Just because they believed Fukuyama about the end of history, they probably shouldn't. We also should add to the polling data that it's only in Britain 20% who want to go. The closer you go to the border, the lesser are the numbers. Should be different, right? By the logic. In Germany, only 17% will go to fight. In Poland, only 15.7 said yes. And the closer we come to Ukraine, more people would pick to evacuate, to be a refugee if things escalate. Not sure what the situation is with the Baltic countries. They're not part of that poll. In the Baltic countries, it doesn't quite matter how many people will go fight. The size is rather incompatible. If United States abstain from the conflict, the capabilities are very incongruent. And in this scenario, Baltic countries are facing a catastrophe. Well, there was one more thing that I did not have time to mention in our last stream. When GPS stopped working for a large part of Poland and the Baltic countries, actually in the area of Suwałki corridor, do you think it was any action by Russia that might have caused it? Well, either or. It's Americans could be training for military purposes, or Russians have done something. And Americans can just turn it off because they own it, but Russians could suppress it with radio electronic measures. The West is accusing Russians for now, but I can generally see them turning it off for military exercises. And there's a separate GPS system for military, which is more precise. And of course, you can turn off civilian and to see what and how is the military GPS providing for that area. Perhaps it was part of the exercise to turn off civilian service and see what the military is capable of. Or perhaps Russian shenanigans, we don't know yet. There was also a message from Janet Yellen, Minister of Finance of the United States. She reassured Prime Minister of Ukraine, Denis Shmyhal, that Biden's administration will provide budgetary support to Kiev in the size of $10 billion as a part of additional request for funding. Is it outside the $61 billion, or that's what's included? these additional options. And the bad paradox of that is that United States president has enough ways to support Ukraine even without Congress. He has a lot of capabilities to restart Lend-Lease or other programs and to supply us both with money and military equipment. But he is not willing to start that. And he is nodding towards American Congress. So we are essentially hostages of American inner political squabble by both factions. And both factions, isolationists and globalists, they're all using the topic of aid to Ukraine in their political fight. And despite that, President of the United States still has levers to provide a lot of aid to Ukraine, and he's not using them. So there was recently an audit of Ukraine, so they'll be bringing back the audit materials, and they'll probably be used during the vote in Congress, but the perspectives for that vote are still foggy. Direct aid, yeah, they might actually do that. They might use different funds to provide this 10 billion additionally. So with that, there was also a negative signal from United States that Pentagon has no more money for Ukraine. And they're conducting a meeting with 50 allies to support Kiev. They're telling that they're out of funds. They are incapable of sending missiles and shells to Ukraine that are needed there for repelling the Russian invasion, because that aid became muddied in the internal politics, and Biden administration basically told at the meeting of 50 countries that coordinate aid for Ukraine that they're out of resources for the moment. So do you think this is additional manipulation to provoke Europe, in your view? What is it? This is very typical for the West. Some whining when they need additional money. This is basically a tradition, and people understand the signal correctly. When United States are telling European and non-European partners, because there are non-European partners in Rammstein, they're basically telling them, guys, it's your turn as well. And it's an American dream to actually try to put some responsibility on the Europeans, and that's the message from Biden's administration. You guys are not willing to spend even 2% on that expense, while we're pulling the main part of it. And that's also a message internally to its own Congress that Ukraine actually might lose if we do not support them. And I'm not too concerned with that messaging. That's internal agenda. What I'm more concerned is that Biden is not using his direct capabilities, avoiding Congress as a president. So this is a more interesting question, and we did talk about that before. And with all that, we cannot say that Europe is not reacting to anything. Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, said that aid that is set aside by European Union for Ukraine for this year is not enough. He implored the allies countries, EU members, to increase this aid. He is saying that he is doing a lot of phone conversations with his colleagues, and he's asking them to do more. In this regard, do you think Germany still has influence over the allies? How do you see their role in this? Germany is the second country by the volume of military aid to Ukraine after the United States. They're even bigger than Britain now. And they're very active. They're a core country, the main budget-forming country of European Union. And Europeans are joking that Germany is the one giving money and French are the ones who want to use that. And their voice is very noticeable in EU. But their processes are still not without a hiccup. Taurus missiles are still not agreed to transfer to Ukraine, but packages are still going. And despite us being happy when Germany supplies us with different materials, all these battalion complexes that they're sending is a vanishingly small size of support. They just don't have anything, really. So their voice is, yes, definitely hefty in Europe, but their number of resources they can deliver, it's somewhat limited. Well, you think Scholz can press on the partners to make sure that they provide more support? Not so much press, but they're listening to him, right? Because there is Orban, there is Fico. Germany, and by the way, Alexei, Fico did say that. No, sorry, Nikolay, let me finish. Germany pressing, it's not about Germany. Germany is negotiating. Germany is conversing. They're not pressing. It's not their political tradition right now. And in the framework of Normandy and Minsk agreements, of recognizing Crimean status quo, they did actually exert something akin to political pressure, but they were exerting it onto Ukraine, not on anybody else. Well, it was mostly done by Merkel as a chancellor. Scholz is a different story, and he has to deal with the coalition government, which is rather fragile. His opposition is promising to create its own coalition. And his opponent said that there should be no aid to Ukraine, and the extreme left and extreme rights are now rejoicing over the statement. So a lot of those who were concerned about prohibiting that political activity of the extreme left now are happy that they're expressing similar points of view. And of course, there are other people, more reasonable ones, who are saying that we are next. If Ukraine loses, we'll be in a much worse condition and we'll have to face the same threat. So it's different. Scholz is not a popular chancellor. His rating is very low, but he is still holding the coalition government and doing all the kind of acrobatics. So on one hand, they did not vote for Taurus. On the other hand, they did manage to bring it for a vote. And it was not an easy feat with such a patchy coalition that they have. There's the fact of bringing this vote to a vote. Sorry about that formulation, but it means that there are pro-Ukrainian, Ukraine-supporting politicians in Germany. Otherwise, it would not even be on the agenda. But Germany would not be pressing its partners. It will be convincing, talking, but that's their main line. It's interesting to see where this discussion will lead in Europe on the backdrop of what's happening in the United States, on the backdrop of what's happening in Russia when they're amping up their military-industrial complex, on the backdrop of that big war in Ukraine where we are drowning without aid. That line started to sound louder and louder of general action and support. How soon will it be reflected into the material actions? I'm still skeptical, but a year ago we definitely did not have that line. It was not visible. There were some select friends of Ukraine, but they were almost on the margins. Right now, there are definitely big supporters, Minister of Defense, the head of the parliament faction, head of a committee. Will they have enough time to act? They even recently acknowledged that their politics over 30 years was mistaken when they essentially de-blooded, took all the blood and energy away from their military-industrial complex. So they either will be effective and quick, and then Ukraine may get some bare minimum to continue holding it, and Europe as well might get some resources to hold its own. We're not talking about heroic victories and major counteroffensive and borders of 91, but at least we'll be able to hold the situation. And that's what they're talking about directly. So in this regard, Europe actually is rather open to discussion. Their task is, as they're saying, to hold the situation, to not let Ukraine lose. And I think more and more in Ukraine, we're not talking about borders of 91 as operative goal. Political goal, definitely, that's a different story. We should regain our territories on the political level, but on the practical and military goals immediately at hand, the situation is different. So Germans, they are generally conducting pro-Ukrainian politics, and it's not easy. Their coalition is cranking about that, but we are definitely thankful for this effort. But we can say that this politics is not enough. It's just not enough to provide us with enough means in the next biggest war after the Second World War in Europe. Because, once again, I remind our listeners that the whole West was not only discharging their existing military capacities, but they were also planning for a brief, quick, special operation type warfare. Now that we're talking about the big, all-nation-wide warfare, you need to change everything. The way you conscribe people into the army, the way you train them, the way you rotate them. Even your munitions and your equipment needs to be reviewed. It needs to be massive and inexpensive. A good example is FPV drone. When you have super expensive Leopard that breaks on the second day and it's too long and too expensive to fix it, these tanks cannot fight this conflict. You need to change the logic, you need to change the principle of your armaments and your equipment. And then the question, how are they going to restart their military production? Do they have new examples, new models that can be produced en masse that are cheap? or would they still be betting on high technology weapons? Then they would definitely will slack behind and will not be in time, because you cannot manufacture enough of these high-tech weapons for this huge-scale war. It takes a lot of resource and it takes a lot of time to build something like that. Let's remind that when the war started, 150 millimeter shell for artillery system price was about $1,500. Now it's about 8,000 plus. That's how the market works. And until they figure out that military production should not be a function of the laws of market, they will not be ready in time. It just should not be. For the events like this, it's suicidal. And I can bring an example. I think this current war will bring an understanding for many countries that medicine, education, church, and security should not be part of the market. The market should be only present with the consumer goods, where there is food, electronics, cell phones, and these things should not be on the free market. Military production should not be on the market. It can be private, but it should not be fully managed by the laws of the market, of the open market. Otherwise, they would be planning just like now. As an example, let's allocate $1 billion for artillery shells. By the time that money is allocated, market laws of capitalization of shares of the military companies had worked, and now the shells cost, instead of 1,500 to almost 10,000. So you produce 10 times less. On one hand, everybody is happy and everybody made money, but on the other hand, the country is not ready for it. And that's exactly what's happening with all these capitalizations and throwing money into the military production that gets reflected in the shares and the stockholder options. Everything becomes more expensive. And then these huge investments in Western shells will end up probably costing us an artillery shell of $25,000 per unit. You cannot fight the war like that with hundreds and thousands of them dumped on the enemy at this price. It's interesting, Alexei, that they are not really limiting the price point for these articles, right? They're interested as a country, but they're not. Well, yeah, we're talking about capitalization, because that has deep connections with financial system. What will the unions say? What will lawyers say? If the factory is working overtime, there are investments, but the shares are not growing. That is not allowable. That's a crash of the financial system, right? So they have a lot of things to address. To be continued in part 2.